June 4th, 1942. Mid-Pacific, northwest of Midway Atoll. The morning is already hot enough to make the steel flight deck shimmer, and the air around the carrier Akagi reeks of gasoline and exhaust. Deck crews crouch low, as if the sky itself might lean down and crush them. Somewhere above, the sun is bright and clean, too calm for what is coming. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo stands near the island, jaw tight, eyes narrowed against glare. Around him, officers of the First Air Fleet watch the horizon with the stubborn confidence of men who have won too many battles to imagine losing one. Their carriers have struck Pearl Harbor, crushed the Indian Ocean raid, broken the Allies again and again with a single hard punch from the air. The doctrine has become almost a religion. Find the enemy. Launch first. Strike clean. Return before the enemy can answer. But today, the timing is wrong. Everything feels out of rhythm. Messages come in clipped bursts. Scouts report uncertain contacts. Midway's airfield, battered but not silenced, keeps spitting aircraft into the sky. Down on the hangar deck, bombs and torpedoes are shuffled like dangerous playing cards. Switched and switched again as the staff tries to decide what the enemy really is and where the killing blow should fall. The carrier is a city made of fuel fumes and thin metal. One mistake, one spark, and the whole thing becomes a furnace. Then, without warning, the sky tilts, a shout cuts through the flight deck noise. Look up. You see them first as dark specks dropping out of the sun, too steep, too fast. U.S. Navy dive bombers, SBD Dauntless, falling almost vertically. Their wings tremble under the strain. Their engines howl in a sound that feels like a scream. For a heartbeat, it seems impossible. Japanese fighters have been busy low, chasing torpedo planes that came in slow and doomed. The sky above was supposed to be safe. That was the logic. That was the pattern. Now the pattern breaks. Bombs peel away. The first explosion slams into the deck with a crack that you feel in your teeth. Another detonates near armed aircraft. Flames leap instantly. Bright orange, hungry, as if the carrier has been waiting to burn. Shrapnel bites into metal. Men run, slip, fall, get up again. The heat hits like an opened kiln door. Smoke rolls across the deck, thick and black, blotting out the sun. Nagumo's staff tries to speak, to make order from chaos, but their words are swallowed by the roar. The carrier shudders. The Akagi begins to die. In the following hours, as the other carriers are hit and the once invincible striking force collapses into wreckage and oil slicks, Japanese naval officers will argue over why. Bad luck. They will say, poor scouting, a few minutes of fate. They will insist the fundamentals remain sound. The Imperial Japanese Navy still has skilled pilots. Fierce spirit, the offensive edge. But something else has happened here. Something quieter than fire. The Americans did not simply strike. They coordinated. They absorbed losses and still delivered the blow at the decisive moment. Their carrier crews turned chaos into action fast enough to make that moment possible. That idea lingers like smoke in the back of the mind, even as survivors are picked from the water. Months later, in wardrooms and headquarters, other admirals will speak of it in harder tones, not always as admiration, sometimes as irritation, sometimes as disbelief. Admiral Jisaburo Osawa, watching reports accumulate from the Solomon Islands campaign, will hear the same complaint from air group leaders again and again. The Americans are getting better at meeting raids, better at putting fighters where they should not be, better at bringing damaged carriers back into action sooner than expected. An intelligence officer points to a line on a chart. The Americans are using radar more effectively. He says, their ships can see aircraft beyond visual range, and their fighter direction is improving. It means U.S. fighters are not just reacting, they are being guided. In a conference room thick with cigarette smoke, A senior officer mutters that American carrier aviation is changing. Not in a single leap, but in a steady climb, like an aircraft finding the right altitude. Standard procedures, repeated training, radios used with discipline, radar screens turned into warnings, warnings turned into interceptions. A Japanese admiral listens, fingers steepled, and answers with something that sounds like dismissal, but is not. He says the Americans are learning quickly, too quickly. They are building a system, not relying on brilliance alone. It is an unsettling thought, because the Japanese carrier arm has been built on brilliance. Veteran pilots shaped by long training, long hours, and a ruthless winnowing that produces masters. It wins spectacularly, but it does not replace itself easily. In 1942, the gap is not yet fatal. Not yet. But if you stand in that smoke at Midway and imagine the future, you can almost feel it. Two different kinds of air war are being born. One that depends on irreplaceable experts, and another that depends on a machine that can be taught, standardized, repeated, and scaled. The Japanese admirals do not call it that. Not in so many words. They simply begin to sense that the enemy's naval aviation is evolving into something unforeseen, something that will not tire, something that will not run out of skilled hands. And out on the dark water where the carriers burn, the first lesson is written in fire. October 26th, 1942, south of the Santa Cruz Islands. The sea is a dark blue plate flecked with white caps, and above it the sky is crowded with layered cloud that keeps swallowing aircraft whole. On the carrier deck, Japanese mechanics move with the practiced speed of men who know every minute matters. Their pilots, faces already streaked with sweat, step up into the cockpits as if climbing into an extension of their own bodies. Out on the horizon, the American carriers are somewhere beyond sight, somewhere beyond certainty. Rear Admiral Kakuji Kakuta, overseeing air operations, studies the reports with a frown that will not lift. The previous months around Guadalcanal have not felt like the quick, clean victories of early 1942. There are too many close calls, too many raids that meet fighters sooner than expected, too many American aircraft that seem to be waiting at the exact altitude and bearing where a strike will appear. A young staff officer brings a message and tries to sound confident while reading it. American fighters engaged the incoming raid earlier than forecast. Again, the same cold word repeats in after-action, summaries like an accusation. Radar. The Japanese have radar sets now in limited numbers, fitted to some ships, sometimes unreliable, sometimes misread. But the Americans are not just detecting, they are directing. That is the part that eats at the mind. They are using radar as an invisible hand, reaching into the sky, placing fighters in the path of a raid. In the American task force, the scene looks different. On a carrier like Enterprise, in a cramped compartment lit in dim red, men sit hunched over scopes. The air smells of hot electronics and stale coffee. The radar operator calls out range and bearing. A fighter director repeats it, voice calm, almost bored. Outside, the sky is empty to the naked eye, but on the screen it is alive with small moving blips. The director speaks into a microphone. Vector, altitude, speed, turn, hold. Up there, an F-4F Wildcat squadron adjusts course like a flock of birds responding to a single shared instinct. Except the instinct is a voice in their headphones. American pilots still die, still make mistakes, still get surprised, but they are being guided toward the fight instead of stumbling into it. They are learning to fight as part of a system. Back on the Japanese side, the veterans feel it first in their bones. A Zero pilot, returning to the deck after a chaotic engagement, climbs out and rips off his helmet. Face hard, he tells his division leader that the Americans appeared too soon, in the wrong place. He gestures at the sky as if pointing at a ghost. He insists it is not luck. They are being led. Later, in a shipboard briefing, an admiral listens to the debriefs with his eyes lowered. When he finally speaks, the room goes quiet. He does not shout. He does not need to. He says the enemy is becoming difficult to surprise. He says their defenses are thickening like armor. And in the weeks that follow, around the long misery of Guadalcanal, Japanese senior officers begin to use a new tone when they talk about American naval aviation. Not fear exactly. Not praise. A wary respect that sounds like irritation. They talk about American replacements, how quickly new pilots appear, how strikes keep coming even after heavy losses, how the Americans rotate carriers in and out, patch them, and return them to combat, how their flight deck crews recover from damage with a speed that seems unnatural. A staff officer dares to say what others are thinking. The Americans are not relying on a few extraordinary men. They are producing competence in bulk. An admiral answers with a grim nod. He says the enemy trains differently. They standardize, they repeat, they write procedures and drill them until they become instinct. He does not have to add the next part. Everyone in the room already knows. Japan does not have the depth for that kind of loss. The Japanese naval air arm has been built like a sword, forged slowly, folded again and again, beautiful and deadly, but expensive in time and blood to make. The Americans, it seems, are building a factory. Through 1943, as the war stretches and the maps fill with red pins and casualty lists, this contrast grows sharper. The USS. Navy introduces new aircraft and new habits. Radios are used with more discipline. Formation tactics become cleaner. Fighter direction improves. Combat information centers become the brain of the fleet. Pulling in sightings, plotting tracks, feeding fighters into the sky like a measured, controlled response. At sea, a Japanese carrier pilot sees it in a moment that lasts only seconds. He is escorting bombers toward an American task force. The cloud layer breaks and sunlight floods the cockpit. Ahead, he expects scattered resistance. Instead, dark shapes appear at the exact altitude, turning in, closing fast. Wildcats or the newer Hellcats, big and solid, guns already spitting. There is no frantic search, no delay, no confusion, just contact. His mouth goes dry. He banks hard, feels the zero shudder, hears rounds tearing fabric somewhere behind him. Afterward, those who return speak in low voices. They say the Americans always seem to be waiting. They say the sky around an American carrier is no longer empty space. It is a trap with walls you cannot see until you hit them. In Tokyo, far from the spray and smoke, admirals read these reports and begin to understand something that Midway only hinted at. This is not merely an enemy getting braver. This is an enemy learning faster than expected, and scaling that learning into an organized force. Radar is only one tool. The real weapon is the method behind it. And as Japanese veterans fall away one by one over the Solomons, the admirals see the future taking shape, like a storm line on the horizon. They can still fight it. They can still strike hard, but they can no longer pretend it is the same war they started in 1941. February 1st, 1944. Truck Lagoon. The air is humid and heavy, the kind that clings to skin and makes uniforms feel like wet cloth. Japanese sailors call this place their Gibraltar of the Pacific, a fortress at anchor, guarded by reefs, aircraft, and the belief that the Americans must bleed for every mile. But belief is not a radar screen. Belief cannot see through cloud. A lookout's shout carries across a deck slick with condensation. High to the northeast, tiny dots appear, bright as fish scales in sunlight. Then more. The dots multiply until the sky seems sprinkled with moving metal. The first bombs arrive with a delay that feels cruelly casual. A whistling fall, a split second of silence, then the lagoon erupts in columns of water and flame. Shock waves slap holes, rattle teeth, and toss men off balance. This is not a probing raid. This is a machine at full output. American carrier aviation in early 1944 moves with a confidence that feels different from 1942. They are not improvising anymore. They are executing. On the Japanese side, the defenders scramble aircraft from short runways and makeshift fields. Zeros claw upward, engines strained by heat. Pilots squint into glare, searching for the incoming formations. The sky above Truk is wide and blinding and full of American fighters that seem to arrive in layers. Some of those American fighters are new to the Japanese pilots, at least in the numbers now appearing. Grumman F-6F Hellcats. They look thick and powerful, not elegant like a Zero. They dive faster, absorb punishment, and climb well enough to keep pressure on. They also arrive with pilots who do not seem rare anymore, not legendary aces. Just solid men who fly their aircraft like they have been trained to do one job correctly. The same way, every time. That is the part that lands like a punch. In a briefing room on a Japanese carrier or at a naval air station, an admiral listens to returning pilots describe the fight. The pilots do not embellish. They are too tired for that. One says the Hellcats keep coming in pairs and fours, disciplined, covering one another. Another says American fighters are guided into position as if someone above the clouds is pointing. A staff officer spreads out maps and tries to make sense of it. He marks interception points. The pattern looks too neat. This is when the Japanese High Command begins to speak more openly about replacement quality. It is not just that Japan is losing aircraft. It is losing the men who know how to use them at the edge of survival. The veteran cadre that struck Pearl Harbor and dominated early battles is thinning. Every combat tour over Guadalcanal has drained it. Every attritional month has taken one more irreplaceable pilot. In their place come younger men with fewer hours, fewer carrier landings, less gunnery practice, less time over open ocean with nothing but compass and dead reckoning to bring them home. In contrast, American training is becoming standardized and scaled. New pilots arrive with predictable competence. Their formation flying is cleaner. Their radio discipline is sharper. Their gunnery is practiced. Their carrier landing procedures are drilled until they become reflex. A Japanese admiral, reading summaries late into the night, finally speaks a line that will echo in different forms across Japanese records and recollections. He does not deny American courage. He does not insult American ability anymore. He says the enemy has improved beyond what they expected. In early 1942, it was possible to believe American naval aviation was clumsy, slow to adapt. That belief is dead by early 1944. Now the question in Japanese headquarters is not whether the Americans will learn, it is how fast. The answer is visible above Truk as wave after wave arrives, coordinated, timed, and protected. Dive bombers strike while fighters sweep. Torpedo planes come in under cover. Reconnaissance feeds the next attack. It feels like a rolling tide that never runs out. At sea, a Japanese pilot experiences the new reality in a few terrifying seconds. He is climbing to meet an incoming group, eyes flicking between the horizon and his instruments. The sky is bright and nearly empty. Then his wingman shouts, "High above, contrails!" The contrails bend, converging, like white spears angled toward them. The pilot pushes the throttle. The Zero surges, but the closing speed is wrong. Too fast. Hellcats drop down out of the sun, and the air fills with bullets. The Zero's light structure vibrates as rounds pass close. He yanks the stick and feels the aircraft respond instantly. Still agile, still sharp. But now, agility is not enough. He cannot climb away. He cannot dive away without being followed. The Hellcat stays with him like a larger predator, not graceful, but relentless. When he finally breaks free into cloud, his breath is ragged. He realizes his hands are shaking. He returns to base and sits on a crate, staring at the ground, trying to make sense of it. He is trained to be an elite weapon, but he is not trained to fight an enemy whose average pilot is good enough. Every time, and whose fighters arrive with unseen guidance, Japanese admirals begin to see the war shifting from individual brilliance to systemic strength. They will still speak of spirit, of courage, of sacrifice, but now, in private, they speak of numbers and hours and procedures. They speak of the American ability to replace losses. They speak of radar-guided interceptions. They speak of combat information centers and fighter direction. They speak of a sky that is being organized against them, and all of it points toward a coming moment they can almost feel. A decisive carrier battle where the Japanese will need their air groups to perform at peak skill, under pressure, against a defense that is no longer improvising, but hunting. That battle is forming in the mind before it forms on the sea. In June 1944, the Japanese will sail to meet the American carriers near the Marianas, hoping to stop the invasion and reclaim initiative. They will go believing they still have a chance to strike first, to land the kind of blow that once decided everything. But the unseen evolution in American naval aviation has already been setting the trap for 2 years. June 19th, 1944. Western Pacific, east of the Mariana Islands. Dawn spreads pale light across a restless sea, and the horizon looks strangely close, as if the world has narrowed to a ring of water and steel. On the Japanese flagship, Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa watches the morning develop with a calm face that hides strain. He knows what is at stake. The Americans are landing on Saipan. If Japan cannot break the invasion fleet, the inner defense line cracks open. This is the moment the carrier arm was made for. Below decks, air group commanders review launch plans. Pilots fasten harnesses, check maps, tap fuel gauges, and rehearse in their minds the long over-water flight. The atmosphere has the quiet tension of men about to step into a storm. Some of the younger pilots try to look like veterans. The veterans notice and say nothing. On the flight deck, Zeros, Judys, and Jills sit lined up, wings folded and engines warming, props flickering the air into shimmering heat. The smell of avgas hangs thick. The carriers feel alive, like animals straining at a leash. Ozawa gives the order to launch. The first strike lifts off in stages, aircraft rolling down decks, rising into the humid air, then turning toward the east where the Americans are believed to be. The Japanese plan depends on reach. Their aircraft can fly farther than many American types. They can strike from outside the enemy's immediate range. It is a doctrine built on distance and surprise. But surprise is hard when the enemy can see you coming. Far to the east, on American carriers. The day begins in a different kind of room. In combat information centers, officers and radar operators stand over glowing scopes and plotting boards. The lighting is dim, the air cool compared to the flight deck. Voices are clipped and practiced. A radar operator calls contacts. Multiple groups, bearing, range, altitude estimates. The blips are faint at first, then steady, then multiplying. They are not guesses. They are tracks. The fighter director does not panic. He has done this before. He has drilled it. He speaks into the microphone with calm authority. Sending squadrons to intercept, out above the sea. American fighters climb into position like pieces on a board being moved by an unseen hand. F-6F Hellcats, their engines strong and steady, rise into the sunlit air and form up. The pilots are not searching blindly. They are being led. As the Japanese strike approaches, the first contact is not visual. It is a radio call. Enemy raid. Vector. Angels. Turn now. The Hellcats bank. Their wings catch the sun. The ocean rolls beneath them, distant and indifferent. The Japanese pilots, many of them young, are focused on navigation, on fuel, on staying in formation over featureless water. Their eyes scan for the enemy fleet ahead. not for fighters arriving from above and ahead, positioned with purpose. When they finally see American aircraft, it is like suddenly noticing a door that has already closed. The first interception is brutal. Hellcats dive through the top cover. Tracer fire stitches through the blue. A Zero snaps into a hard turn, but the Hellcat does not overshoot the way an older Wildcat might have. The American pilot stays controlled, firing in short bursts, not wasting ammunition. His sights steady because he has practiced this exact shot 100 times in training. A Japanese dive bomber formation begins to scatter, pilots instinctively braking to avoid death. That scattering ruins their timing, breaks their mutual protection, and turns a coordinated strike into a collection of frightened individuals. This is where the American system shows its teeth. More Hellcats arrive, not at random, but in waves, guided to the fight, replacing those who peel away low on fuel. Anti-aircraft fire from American ships adds a second layer. Black bursts bloom in the sky, forcing Japanese aircraft to jink and climb and lose speed. Radios crackle with warnings and orders. Japanese leaders trying to reassemble formations that are dissolving under pressure. Some Japanese pilots push through anyway. They descend toward the American fleet, seeking carriers. The view is a shock. The U.S. task force looks immense. Ships spread out in disciplined screens, wakes crisscrossing, the carriers at the center like armored hearts. It is not a loose collection. It is a machine. A few Japanese bombers dive. One releases too high, another releases too late. Bombs fall wide. Torpedoes miss or are dropped in desperation. A handful of aircraft manage to hit ships. But the damage is nothing like the decisive blow Ozawa needs. And the cost is horrifying. As survivors turn back toward the west, fuel low and nerves shredded, the Hellcats follow them down, taking easy shots at aircraft that can no longer maneuver well. Some Japanese pilots ditch into the sea, their canopies thrown open at the last second. Salt spray slamming into faces as they hit water. Others burn, spiraling down in thin smoke trails that end in a splash. Back on the Japanese carriers, the consequences arrive in fragments. A single Zero limps in with holes in the wings, landing hard, bouncing, almost sliding off the deck. The pilot climbs out, pale and shaking, and salutes out of habit. His division is gone. A Judy returns with its tail damaged, barely controllable. It lands and collapses a landing gear, skidding in sparks. Deck crews rush in, dragging the pilot free. The air group officers count planes. The numbers are wrong. Far too low. Ozawa receives reports from the first raid, then the second, then the third. Each raid was met far from the American fleet by fighters that appeared as if summoned. Each raid suffered severe losses. Each raid achieved little. He listens without moving, then finally speaks in a low voice that carries weight. He says the enemy is intercepting with radar guidance. He says their fighter direction is effective. He says the American defense is not simply strong, it is organized. Around him, staff officers exchange glances. There is a shared understanding that cannot be spoken loudly. Japan is bleeding out its carrier pilots in one day. The Americans, meanwhile, are already resetting. Refueling fighters, rearming, launching replacements into the sky. Their pilots return, debrief quickly, take a drink of water, and prepare for the next vector. The system keeps turning. By late afternoon, the name for this day is already forming among the Japanese aviators who survive. It is not poetic, it is not noble, it is a slaughter. And in Ozawa's mind, a realization hardens. The long-hoped decisive battle is not arriving as a clash of equals. It is becoming a test of whether Japan can even keep an air group alive long enough to matter. June 20th, 1944. Philippine Sea. Late afternoon. The sun hangs low and harsh, turning the ocean into a sheet of molten bronze. Heat haze blurs the horizon and makes ships look like mirages. The air over the American task force is thick with exhaustion and salt. But the work continues anyway because the enemy is still out there. On Admiral Ozawa's flag carrier, the mood is colder now. The previous day has stripped away illusions. The Japanese carrier decks are quieter, not because there is peace, but because there are fewer aircraft left to make noise. Empty parking spots on the deck feel like missing teeth. The air groups have been hollowed out. Ozawa stands with his staff and studies the reports as if staring long enough might change what happened. His strikes failed to break the American carriers. Worse, the losses were not just numbers, they were experience. Each veteran gone is a library burned. Yet he is still at sea, still in range of an enemy that is hunting him. A staff officer brings fresh information. American aircraft have been sighted searching. The enemy is looking for the Japanese carriers, and if they find them, the remaining Japanese air cover will be thin. Ozawa makes the choice he must. The fleet will withdraw to the west. It is the correct strategic move, but it carries its own bitter taste. The decisive battle was supposed to restore initiative. Instead, it has become a retreat under pressure. Far away, on the American side, another decision is being argued in the open air and engine noise. The American carriers have the advantage, but their pilots have flown hard. Fuel calculations are tight. The enemy is far. The daylight is fading. A strike launched now might have to return in darkness, risking mass ditchings. But if they do not strike, the Japanese carriers may slip away. American commanders choose to strike anyway. On the flight decks, aircraft are spotted quickly, as if the ship itself has learned the choreography. Hellcats, Helldivers, and Avengers are refueled and armed. Crewmen wave signals, guide planes, lock chocks, pull pins. Pilots climb in, check radios, glance at the sun, and understand they may be landing in the dark on a moving deck after a long flight. They go anyway. The strike lifts off. Engines roaring, wheels retracting. Aircraft forming into a long stream that arcs westward toward the Japanese fleet. For the Japanese, the first sign is a distant speck that becomes many specks, a thin line against the light. The remaining Japanese fighters scramble, but there are fewer. The intercept is hurried, not guided with the same precision the Americans enjoy. Some Zeros climb too late. Some climb to the wrong altitude. The sky is large and the defenders are tired. American aircraft arrive like a hammer. Hellcats sweep ahead, chopping through what little fighter cover remains. Behind them, dive bombers drop with disciplined timing, and torpedo planes skim low over the sea. The Japanese carriers and escorts throw up anti-aircraft fire, bursts and tracers filling the air. But the volume is not enough to create a wall. It is more like desperate shouting. A Japanese carrier takes hits. Another ship is struck and begins to burn. Smoke rises in thick columns that smear the sunset. On decks, men run with hoses and stretchers, trying to fight fires that spread along fuel lines and through hangar spaces. The smell of burning paint and oil rolls across the fleet. And still, for Ozawa, the deeper disaster is not the damage to steel. It is the men, as American aircraft depart, returning to the east with fuel running low. Some Japanese pilots chase them, but the pursuit is ragged. There is no unified direction. There is no spare strength. The veteran corps that once would have coordinated a disciplined counterattack is simply not there anymore. This is the breaking point. Even before the war, Japan's naval aviation training pipeline was long and selective. It produced excellent pilots, but in limited quantities. In 1941 and early 1942, that was fine because the best pilots survived, and victories were swift. Now the war is not swift. It is a grinder. Losses are constant. Carrier operations punish the inexperienced. Combat punishes them more. By June 1944, the gap is brutal. A surviving Japanese squadron leader walks the deck after the June 20th strike. looking at the faces that remain. He recognizes how many are new. He recognizes, too, that he does not know their habits, their instincts, the way he once knew his men. The old names are gone. The old voices in the ready room are absent. Their jokes, their arguments, their confidence. All of it has been replaced by a tense quiet. He goes below and sits with the other surviving officers. Their uniforms are sweat-stained. Their eyes are bloodshot. One of them speaks softly, almost to himself. He says they have lost the air battle. Not just this one, but the kind of air battle that decides wars. In headquarters, far from the sea, Japanese admirals will later use different words, but the meaning will be the same. They will acknowledge that the Americans have improved rapidly, and that Japanese losses in experienced pilots cannot be repaired in time. They will admit, in sober tones, that American naval aviation has become something they did not anticipate. For American pilots, the day ends in a different kind of danger. The strike returns late. The sun drops and the ocean turns dark. Aircraft arrive low on fuel, some on fumes. On carrier decks, lights are kept minimal, the Black Sea swallowing everything beyond the ship. Landing signal officers wave paddles, guiding planes down onto the moving deck. Engines roar, then cut, tires slam, hooks catch cables with a metallic shriek. Some aircraft miss, wave off, circle again, burning the last drops. Some pilots ditch in the dark. Rescue destroyers race to pick up men bobbing in life vests, their faces lit by flashes of signal lamps. The Americans pay a price for the long-range strike. But they can pay it. They have depth. They have trained replacements. They have a system that can endure even when it hurts. The Japanese cannot pay the price they have already paid. And in the quiet that follows, as Ozawa's surviving ships steam westward under a sky now empty of friendly air, cover, the truth settles like ash. The Imperial Japanese Navy still has ships. It still has courage. It still has admirals who can maneuver fleets. But its carrier air arm, the elite weapon that once seemed unstoppable, has been gutted in 2 days. The unforeseen evolution of American naval aviation has reached its most merciless proof. July 1944, Inland Sea of Japan. The summer air is thick with heat and the smell of salt carried inland by wind. In conference rooms near naval headquarters, fans turn lazily, doing little against humidity. Uniform collars are undone when no one important is watching. Papers lie in stacks like small tombstones, each one stamped with the reality of the Philippine Sea. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa has returned, not as the triumphant commander of a decisive victory, but as a man carrying a wound that cannot be bandaged. His surviving staff assemble briefings that feel like autopsies. Charts show sorties launched and aircraft returned. They show fuel limits and navigation errors and interception points. They show a sky that closed around Japanese strikes far from their targets. And then the numbers that matter most. How many pilots are gone? How many experienced leaders did not come back? How many carrier-qualified men were lost in a single concentrated span of hours? In the room, a senior officer speaks with the careful restraint of someone announcing a death in the family. He explains that the Americans intercepted incoming raids using radar-gated fighter direction. Their combat information centers acted like a nerve center, receiving contacts, plotting them, and sending fighters in the correct direction at the correct altitude. The result was that Japanese strikes were not meeting a loose barrier. They were meeting a planned defense. Ozawa listens. His face does not change much, but his eyes narrow. When he finally speaks, it is not dramatic. It is quiet and heavy. He says, in effect, that American naval aviation is no longer what it was in 1942. It has become something else, something integrated, something that learns and scales. Other admirals echo the same recognition, each from his own angle. Some focus on the American pilot pipeline. The Americans, they say, have standardized training. They produce pilots who fly similar procedures, communicate with similar brevity, and fight in mutual support. Even when an American pilot is not an ace, he is competent. His wingman stays with him. His section leader has practiced the same turns and breakoffs. The whole structure does not depend on one brilliant man. That realization stings because Japan built the opposite. Japan prized excellence and accepted small numbers. It took a long time to create a carrier pilot capable of night approaches, long navigation legs, and the violent precision of air combat. Early in the war, that investment paid off spectacularly. But by 1944, the same system becomes a trap. The training program cannot fill the seats fast enough. Not with the war consuming pilots faster than they can be made. In the weeks after the Philippine Sea, the Japanese try to adapt. They talk about new tactics, new methods, new ways to use what remains. But every discussion circles back to the same hard fact. They cannot recreate the veteran corps. In late 1944, that fact drives decisions that once would have been unthinkable. The Navy begins to accept operations where the pilot is not expected to return. Not because death is glorious, but because the math is broken. When experience cannot be replaced, and the enemy grows stronger each month. The desperate logic of sacrifice begins to seem like the only remaining weapon. For American commanders, the aftermath looks different. They do not celebrate the slaughter in official tones, but among pilots the nickname spreads anyway. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. It is cruel humor, the kind aviators use to blunt what they have seen. But behind the joke is a recognition of their own system. They saw raids coming on radar. They were vectored into position. They fought with aircraft that could take punishment. They returned to decks where procedures were consistent and the fleet could launch again and again. American naval aviation has become industrialized skill. That is what the Japanese admirals had not foreseen in 1941, and what Midway only hinted at in 1942. The Americans did not just build more carriers and more planes. They built a method that turned information into advantage at speed. Radar was not merely a sensor. It was the starting gun for a chain of trained responses. Detect, plot, vector, intercept, recover. Repeat. Every link became stronger between 1942 and 1944. To Japanese eyes, this felt like fighting a sky that was no longer empty space but a managed environment. The American fleet controlled the air around it. Not perfectly, not without loss, but with a consistency Japan could not match. The Japanese could still produce moments of brilliance. They could still land blows, but they could not sustain the air battle long enough to decide anything. In the autumn of 1944 at Leyte Gulf, the consequences are visible. Japanese carriers sail north as decoys, their decks carrying aircraft, but not the kind of air groups that once terrified the Pacific. They serve as bait because their striking power is no longer trusted. The heart of carrier warfare, the ability to deliver coordinated massed air attack and defend against the same, has been drained away. That is the final proof of what the admirals recognized. American naval aviation evolved in 2 years into a system that could see farther, react faster, and replace its losses. Japan, chained to a training model that produced elite individuals but not sustainable mass competence, could not keep up once the war became a marathon. In those humid conference rooms in Japan, as admirals spoke in restrained voices about radar-guided interceptions and the quality of American replacements, the tone was not theatrical. It was the tone of professionals acknowledging an enemy they had underestimated in a specific way. Not in courage, not in will, in the ability to learn, standardize, and turn the sky into a controlled weapon. And out on the Pacific, where the sun still rose over steel and water, that recognition was already shaping the last phase of the war.